Hello, this is Sonia with the Sci-fi Adventures Channel, and I am back with more of Time Tracks. We are now on Chapter 11, which I have titled The Moment of Truth Arrives. So I'm just going to go ahead and get right into the story. The Time Bandit stood menacingly at the entrance of the passenger car, and poor Friedrich stood frozen in front of him. Sophia caught her breath sharply as the Time Bandit's cold eyes zeroed in on her. Although she was initially gripped with fear at the sight of her former captor, she also felt a surge of anger rising up within her for what he had done. For a tense moment, she stood teetering on the brink, anxiously wondering if her fear would consume her. Somehow, she had the presence of mind in that moment to pray for strength, and then, even as her knees were starting to buckle, a sudden and miraculous surge of strength began to course through her. Invigorated immediately and emboldened by her new strength, Sophia made eye contact with her enemy, and to her surprise, even as the Time Bandit continued to regard her with his icy stare, she was able to hold her ground. Striding arrogantly past Friedrich, the Time Bandit came further on into the train until finally stopping midway between Friedrich and Sophia. Sophia blinked in surprise as she watched Friedrich ever so slowly begin to inch his way closer to the door of the passenger car. The Time Bandit had his back partially turned away from Friedrich, and so fortunately he did not seem to detect Friedrich's stealthy maneuvers. Sophia held her breath anxiously, worried that Friedrich was about to do something very reckless. Fortunately, and as fate would have it, he was not given that opportunity, as TC had appeared and was now standing at the open door to the train. Sophia watched with relief as TC motioned with his hand for Friedrich to step aside. Without a sound, TC entered the train, and Daniel and Spencer entered after him. Thankfully, the Time Bandit was still facing away from the passenger car door as this occurred, and he remained so focused on Sophia that he did not detect the new arrivals at first. A brief and heavy silence filled the air then, until the Time Bandit finally broke off his unrelenting gaze on Sophia and abruptly whirled around to face the passenger car entrance. When he saw TC, the Time Bandit did not seem particularly surprised to see the time conductor, and yet his voice was full of indignation. "I knew it would be only a matter of time before you followed me here to the time portal, Flanagan." TC took a step closer to the Time Bandit, who visibly recoiled under TC's steady gaze. "For what purpose have you brought us all here?" The Time Bandit regarded TC with open disdain before answering in a regal tone that not only did not suit him, but Sophia thought quite ridiculous. "I have brought you all here to my time portal." TC's voice suddenly boomed out loudly. "It is not your time portal. You have opened it by illegal means, as you always do." The Time Bandit waved away TC's correction as though it were insignificant and continued. "As I was saying, you have all been summoned here to witness the induction of a new recruit in my rebel army." Daniel sprang out suddenly from behind TC and faced the Time Bandit with an angry and outraged expression. "You had better not be referring to me. When Candace told me there was a good job waiting for me, I had no idea she meant you. I did not agree to work for you, and I never will." The Time Bandit's eyes narrowed into warning slits as he responded in an angry hiss. "Oh, yes, you will. A contract is a contract, and I will not release you from it." Daniel's face grew red with anger. "You and Candace are two of a kind, a couple of liars. I never signed any contract, and you are crazy if you think I will ever join your stupid army." After Daniel spoke these words, an anxious silence fell upon them all again, until the Time Bandit drew in a loud breath of outrage and lunged himself forcefully in Daniel's direction. Stifling a scream, Sophia looked in desperation over at TC, who had already moved quick as lightning to stand between Daniel and the Time Bandit. And then his voice roared out more forcefully than Sophia had ever heard before. "Do not lay a hand on him." The Time Bandit's head reared back in rage at TC's command. "Move out of my way, old man." Daniel agreed to this. We shook hands on it. He will come with me now. Sophia choked back a sob, and Spencer glanced worriedly over at her, looking ready to throw himself into the fray at any moment. Meanwhile, in the midst of all this pandemonium, Friedrich took them all by surprise by suddenly letting out a sharp and high-pitched shout. Sophia was amazed and could not imagine how, even in spite of all the chaos and commotion, that Friedrich had managed to retrieve his briefcase from where she had stashed it earlier under one of the seats, and he had done it without being detected. However he had pulled this off, Friedrich clearly had his briefcase in hand now, and he wasted no time in sprinting out of the train and out of their sight. Friedrich's unexpected exit had the benefit of distracting the Time Bandit long enough for Daniel, with Sophia and Spencer right behind him, to also make a run for it. They all rushed out of the train together, only to stop full in their tracks as they stood and stared wide-eyed and mesmerized at the unbelievable sight looming before them. The wind was still blowing fiercely all around, and right there in the sky, and impossibly hanging in mid-air, was the Time Bandit's illegally opened time portal. It appeared as a wide circle defying gravity, and with flames of fire all around it. Sophia gasped out loud in alarm when she saw Friedrich clutching his briefcase and standing directly in front of the time portal. Just as Sophia was wondering what she should do to help poor Friedrich, TC and the Time Bandit came running out of the train and nearly knocked her over as they both headed at great speed straight toward Friedrich and the open time portal. It took Sophia only a moment to conclude that TC was most likely heading in Friedrich's direction to keep the briefcase with the rift locators away from the Time Bandit, and wanting to help, she shouted out to Daniel and Spencer, "Hurry, we have to help Friedrich." Sophia did not mention that the rift locators were in the briefcase for fear that the Time Bandit might overhear her. But Spencer and Daniel asked no questions as they wasted no time in tearing off into a run straight toward Friedrich, TC, and the Time Bandit. Sophia was right behind them, and within seconds they were all standing in a group directly in front of the time portal. TC had already situated himself, just as he had done on the train, to protect Daniel, directly between Friedrich and the Time Bandit. Friedrich was quite pale now and visibly shaking as he continued to hold onto his briefcase as though for dear life, and looking alarmingly as though he might faint at any moment. Unfortunately, Friedrich seemed to be drawing so much attention that the Time Bandit began to show a disturbing and sudden interest in him. "I do wonder what could be making our scientist here so very nervous." Sophia drew in a sharp breath, suddenly quite terrified herself that the time bandit might have figured out somehow that the rift locators were in Friedrich's briefcase. Fortunately for them all, the time bandit was just then distracted from his inquiry by the appearance of a new person in their midst. The new arrival seemed to have come out of nowhere, and she stood among them now rather nonchalantly in front of the time portal. A gripping wave of unwelcome pain coursed through Sophia at the sight of the newcomer. For the very moment she had laid eyes on her, Sophia knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was Candace. Sophia was struck right away by how different Candace was from her, not only in appearance but in demeanor. Candace's big brown eyes gazed at them all coolly as she flipped her long brown hair behind her shoulders, and she did not greet them, but only stood silently next to the time bandit. The moment Daniel spotted Candace, he frowned deeply, and his blue eyes blazed with fierce anger. "I should have known you would show up, Candace. I do not exactly know what game you and the time bandit here are playing, but I want no part of it, and I want no part of you." To Sophia's surprise, she noted a hint of pain cut through the coolness of Candace's eyes at Daniel's words. But she said nothing as she continued to stand next to the time bandit, who paused long enough to give Candace a welcoming nod and then turned his full attention to TC. "Candace and I are now going to step through this portal with Daniel, and you are not going to stop us." Daniel let out a loud shout of protest when the time bandit made this outrageous declaration, and Sophia gasped out loud in alarm as TC immediately and boldly responded. Sophia stood shaking wide-eyed as TC rushed fiercely and headlong at the time bandit. Sophia could not contain herself then, and she cried out in a panic as TC's tackle had caused both himself and the time bandit to fall to the ground, and there they began to wrestle furiously. Poor Friedrich, who was positioned precariously close to the two figures, now rolling and tumbling all about, shouted anxiously, "Oh dear, what do we do now?" As Friedrich was saying this, his gaze fell pleadingly upon Sophia, and she found herself wondering then if perhaps TC was intentionally creating a distraction, not only to keep the time bandit from forcing Daniel through the time portal, but also in the hope that Friedrich could make a run for it, especially since the rift locators were in his briefcase. Sophia quickly reasoned that since she herself, TC, and Friedrich were the only ones who knew where the rift locators were, and since Friedrich had so heroically retrieved the briefcase, and since TC was now presently busy creating a distraction, surely it was her turn now to do something, and she needed to act fast. Okay, that's the end of chapter 11. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you're enjoying the Time Tracks story, and I want to thank you for joining me. I look forward to being back with you here on the Sci-fi Adventures Channel very soon with more of Time Tracks.